Protesters in Honduras are subjected to heavy repression on the anniversary of the 2009 coup d'etat. The Iranian foreign minister says not enough progress made to save the nuclear deal at a Vienna meeting. And the United States Democratic Party presidential candidate debate sees a heated debate on race. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo. This is From the South. Honduras is marking the 10th anniversary of the coup that ousted former President Manuel Zelaya, with protests against the current President Juan Orlando Hernandez. Thousands of Hondurans are using the occasion to pile pressure on Hernandez to resign. Demonstrations have been taking place for the past 2 months against government's decrees to privatize education and healthcare. Our correspondent Gilda Silvestrucci is on the ground in the capital.
Tegucigalpa, like other cities across the country, remain militarized. As of yet, no reason has been given to why. However, the Liberty and Refoundation Party has been holding peaceful activities, including the installation of a floral display at the monument of the First Tuesday of Resistance Enicio Murillo. Lamentably, the military and the military police prevented the party from realizing the activity. There has been full military deployment in the streets, in Tegucigalpa and San Pedro Sula, and attempts to intimidate people, including the press. Just moments ago, a member of the security forces was taking photos of journalists here, including our team here covering events. Tonight, the Liberty and Refoundation Party has scheduled a concert and a march into the center of the capital.
And Gilda Silvestrucci has been covering the events in Honduras since the unrest began.
On the streets, violence and repression is the same as those days before the coup in 2009. Militarization and criminalization of the protesters hasn't stopped.
We've left behind blood and sweat on the road. We've lost our comrades, our brothers who have fought.
For us, it's a struggle. We have to follow through so we can be free from this dictatorship. And we are also fighting for our children, for our grandchildren.
Nearly 70% of Honduras' population lives in poverty. Over the past decade, current government authorities who were part of the coup have created this grim reality. The country has also seen a worsening of corruption.
10 years ago, our country began to rebuild a model of accumulation of wealth with new forms of entrepreneurship linked to organized crime, drug trafficking, and giving privileges to transnational companies in the country.
Privatizations and concessions of territory, of mining and hydroelectric plants were carried out immediately after the 2009 coup.
It's been a process of depending neoliberalism, social contradictions for the past decade. We are in a highly sensitive moment for the country.
The change of government following the ousting of former President José Manuel Zelaya Rosales wasn't an answer to Honduras' problems. In fact, it was the beginning of a grave crisis.
First, we need to change this government. It's a failure. They've had 10 years and they're even worse. Second, we need to change the figures who dominate the society, beginning with the political class and their stance towards the United States.
Murders, criminalization, prosecution and exile, and military power consolidated to the political power. It all happened after the coup in 2009. Statistics from the human rights organizations reveal that more than 700 people were murdered during the coup. Their relatives are still seeking justice. Those responsible for the coup haven't faced trial, and the murders of hundreds of people remain unpunished.
It all remains the same because the public ministry and the Supreme Court have kept hidden the reports. For example, for my daughter Izzy, obeyed even the ballistic report.
The public ministry has taken little action to bring the requirement of the cases to the prosecutors.
José Manuel Zelaya was accused of promoting a referendum to approve his re-election, but in fact, the current president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, was the one who violated the constitution while being supported by powerful groups, the Supreme Court and the armed forces.
Moving on, Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro has pledged to continue the frozen dialogue with the opposition in Norway, despite alleged assassination attempts against him.
Yo prefiero entonces callar.
I prefer to keep quiet because in these cases I want to advance the dialogue with the Norwegians, if it's going to continue, and we're going to advance with verifiable agreements for the sake of peace in Venezuela.
After an investigation lasting more than a year, the government of Venezuela says it has prevented another attempted coup. A number of civilians and former military officers have been arrested in connection with the plot.
Attacks on military bases like this one were part of the plan to carry out another coup in Venezuela. They also planned to steal weapons and to murder generals and government leaders. President Maduro confirmed the plot.
The complicity of Ivan Duque and the Colombian government is clear. They played an active part in this fascist attempt to kill me and mount terrorist attacks with bombs to kill social movement leaders in Venezuela. Where else could this murderous plan come from but from the Colombian oligarchy, from Ivan Duque and Alvaro Uribe, the killers of Colombia? And the world should know that from Colombia there is a conspiracy to subvert the peace and unity of Venezuela. We will not tolerate this.
The people from abroad in collaboration with the North Americans and the Israelis.
The authorities presented 56 hours of recordings as evidence.
Lo que no sabía Duque, lo que no sabía Piñera.
What Duque, Piñera, and Guaidó didn't know was that our intelligence services had been tracking all these operations for 14 months.
A todas estas operaciones.
Opposition figures are seen and heard preparing attacks, but they also seem to be divided.
They were going to free Raúl Baduel from his jail at Sebin, take him to the Carlota base, then take him to the public TV channel, and from there declare Raúl Baduel president of Venezuela, a second self-proclaimed president in less than 6 months. So I wonder, did they consult Guaidó, or was it to be a coup by Baduel against Guaidó and against President Maduro? That is how things stand in the ranks of Venezuela's far right.
The former general Raúl Baduel is in prison for corruption. While the self-proclaimed leader Juan Guaidó dismissed the government's accusation linking him to this new coup attempt, political observers say Guaidó's reaction is an attempt to minimize the accusations of corruption against members of his inner circle for stealing humanitarian aid in Colombia. A case has been opened against 14 civilians and former military officers for their part in this latest attempt to take power by force. The Attorney General is accusing them of conspiracy and terrorism.
On Wednesday, several Caribbean countries joined a protest at the Organization of American States over the seating of a delegation claiming to represent Venezuela. Antigua and Barbuta's Foreign Affairs Minister told the Assembly's plenary session in Colombia that the OAS needs urgent reforms. He says, as it stands, a few powerful countries coerce 18 votes in a non-transparent way and then impose their will on all.
Members of the media.
Our correspondent, Paula Fernandez, has more from the OAS meeting in Colombia.
Here in Colombia, the OAS General Assembly is taking place where several countries expressed their rejection of the presence of a delegate of Venezuela's opposition leader, Juan Guaidó. For example, Uruguay left the opening event and other countries followed, like Bolivia, who said that Venezuela had already left the OAS and that's why it shouldn't be a central topic. They said that accepting a delegate could mean recognition by the OAS of Juan Guaidó as president. Also joining the call were Nicaragua, Mexico, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago, Antigua and Barbuda, Suriname and Dominica. There have also been several protests to denounce the humanitarian crisis in Colombia, which hasn't been discussed at this meeting.
We thank Paola Fernandez for that report. And coming up after the break, Iran feels not enough progress has been made at a nuclear deal meeting in Austria. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has said not enough progress was made to save the Iranian nuclear deal at a meeting between diplomats in Austria. The remaining nuclear deal signatories, including a number of countries in the European Union, as well as China and Russia, met in Vienna. The United States unilaterally withdrew from the deal a year ago, reimposing aggressive sanctions on Iran. Araghchi said a final decision on reining in uranium production would be taken in Tehran.
Today we had a lengthy Joint Commission meeting, more than 3 hours. All in all, I believe that it was a positive and constructive meeting. I can say one step forward compared to the previous meetings we had, but it is still not enough, and it is still not meeting Iran's expectations. I would certainly report back to Tehran the developments took place in this meeting, the progresses we made in this meeting, and the final decision obviously would be by Tehran to take.
The Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister also addressed INSTEX, the instrument in support of trade exchanges created by France, Germany, and the United Kingdom to facilitate non-dollar trade with Iran.
The European countries, the E3 actually explained in details about INSTEX and the progress that they have made in INSTEX. The INSTEX is now operationalized, and the first transactions are already processed, and more European countries have now joined as shareholders, and it is open to all European countries to do business with Iran. Europeans are working to make to open it to other countries. What we insist is that for INSTEX to be useful for Iran, Europeans need to buy oil from Iran or to consider credit lines for this mechanism. Otherwise, INSTEX is not as they and us expect.
We asked Telesur's political analyst Tariq Ali to explain the tensions between Iran and the United States.
The big demand of the Israelis has been to bomb the nuclear reactors like they did in Iraq some decades ago. The Israelis carried out those attacks, and the United States still recently has been resisting any unilateral Israeli action. And I think that is why the Trump government upped the pressure on Tehran, but they have a huge problem. There was people like John Bolton and other rogue state luminaries in the State Department, and not to mention Pompeo himself, are carrying out this campaign. It appears to be the case that the Pentagon is opposed to any foolish, irrational war in Iran for the time being. So they were thinking of a token bombing in response to Iran bringing down a U.S. drone in its territorial waters. They thought a short, sharp response would be necessary. They almost got it through the Pompeo-Bolton faction, and at the last minute, Trump pulled the plug and said, no, don't do it. Why did he do that? I think because there was opposition in the Pentagon. Otherwise, the whole thing had been agreed. And the pressure really comes from the Israelis, who do not want any sovereign state in the Middle East.
The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries is expected to roll over a deal on cutting supplies at a meeting next week in Austria's capital, Vienna. In an exclusive interview for the Venezuelan Ministry of Petroleum, OPEC Secretary General Mohamed Barkindo said that sanctions on Venezuela and Iran affect all the OPEC nations.
Other geopolitical tensions, in particular in the Middle East, in Iran, in Venezuela, as a result of these punitive sanctions that are imposed on these major producers and exporters of oil. Now, for us in OPEC, sanctions on two founding members of our organizations, major suppliers of oil to the international market, is sanctions on all of us.
Barquindo has also praised Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro for his strong leadership, especially under the current challenges his country is facing.
We have seen continuous strong leadership being provided by President Nicolás Maduro during these challenging times. And as you know, this year, Venezuela currently holds the presidency of the OPEC conference, which is very able Minister Manny Quevedo is deputizing for President Maduro.
At the G20 summit in Japan, Russian President Vladimir Putin has called on the BRICS countries to boost international payments in national currencies and leave aside the US dollar. The president was addressing leaders from Brazil, India, China, and South Africa on the sidelines of the main G20 meeting in the city of Osaka. The 5 BRICS nations represent 40% of the world's population and almost a quarter of global GDP. Putin said they had a duty to seek a more stable international economy.
It is symptomatic that international trade is losing its role as the economic growth locomotive and bearing a heavy burden of protectionism, politically motivated restrictions and barriers. We see low business activity, world debt growth, high volatility on financial, currency and raw materials markets. Under these circumstances, BRICS states should take the initiative in the formation of a more just and stable model of global development, based on the principles of equality, respect to sovereignty, and consideration of all countries' interests.
And coming up after the break, U.S. presidential hopeful Joe Biden scrutinized over racist past. Don't go away. Welcome back. There was a heated exchange over race at the second U.S. Democratic debate. California Senator Kamala Harris attacked former Vice President Joe Biden for once working with segregationist senators to oppose busing. Biden, at a campaign event earlier this month, had cited his ability to get things done even with segregationists. Harris, whose parents are immigrants from Jamaica and India, questioned Biden's opposition to school busing in the 1970s. Busing was used as a means of alleviating racial segregation by transporting students to schools within or outside their local districts.
I do not believe you are a racist, and I agree with you when you commit yourself to the importance of finding common ground. But I also believe, and it's personal, and I was actually it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of 2 United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. And, you know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me. So I will tell you that on this subject, it cannot be an intellectual debate among Democrats. We have to take it seriously. We have to act swiftly.
It's a mischaracterization of my position across the board. I did not praise racist. That is not true, number one. Number two, if we want to have this campaign litigated on who supports civil rights and whether I did or not, I'm happy to do that. I was a public defender. I didn't become a prosecutor. I came out and I left a good law firm to become a public defender when in fact, when in fact my city was in flames because of the assassination of Dr. King. I did not oppose busing in America. What I opposed is busing ordered by the Department of Education. That's what I opposed.
Well, there was a failure of states to integrate public schools in America. I was part of the second class to integrate Berkeley, California public schools almost 2 decades after Brown v. Board of Education.
Because your city council made that decision. It was a local decision.
So that's where the federal government must step in. That's why we have the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. That's why we need to pass the Equality Act. That's why we need to pass the ERA, because there are moments in history where states fail to preserve the civil rights of all people.
I have supported the ERA from the very beginning.
Europe is in the grips of an intense heat wave. Our correspondent, Eduardo Marin, has more from Spain.
At least 2 people have died in Spain due to the heat wave that is hitting the country in the past days. On Thursday, a man in his 80s died after collapsing on the street. Emergency services couldn't help him. And today, Friday, a young man, only 17 years old, has died after working for several hours in an open field. He tried to freshen up by throwing himself in a pool, and due to that harsh change of temperature, he entered into a coma. At least 2 more people are being treated in the hospital due to the consequences of this heat wave. We are expecting to get 44 degrees Celsius in the hottest place in the country. Authorities are warning people of the risks of staying out on the streets during noon and to recommend people to stay under shadows and in places with air conditioners, to drink plenty of water and to be on high alert. Another consequence of the heat is the large wildfire that continues burning trees since Wednesday in the province of Tarragona, and firefighters are still trying to put it out.
We thank Eduardo Marin for that report. In South Africa, following the State of the Nation address by President Cyril Ramaphosa, an important trade agreement was signed between Chinese and South African business entrepreneurs. Joanne Abrahams reports from Cape Town.
Give a big round of applause.
During the special ceremony in Cape Town, 93 economic and trade cooperation agreements were signed.
Gentlemen, for your information, ladies and gentlemen, you may sign your documents.
Minister of Trade and Industry Ibrahim Patel said that the deals worth in excess of 27 billion rand will help create jobs for young people, deepen South Africa's industrial footprint, and grow the country's gross domestic product.
We also offer a very profitable place from which to do business.
In addressing the delegation, Patel describes South Africa as the gateway to reaching more than 1 billion consumers in Africa.
Where a Chinese company partners with a South African company and manufactures here in South Africa, a great opportunity is presented to export duty-free into the rest of the African continent, into the European Union, and into the United States through our favorable trade agreements.
The high-level Chinese delegation was led by Chinese Assistant Minister of Commerce Ren Hongbin.
This trade promotion delegation is made of more than 80 Chinese entrepreneurs from nearly 40 large-scale key enterprises in sectors including agriculture, light industry, textile, medicine, chemistry, and minerals.
Chinese ambassador to South Africa, Lin Songtian, describes South African and Chinese cooperation as entering a new era.
China and South African relations have entered the golden time of harvest.
International Relations and Cooperation Minister Naledi Pandor and the Minister of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, Toko Didiza, also attended the signing ceremony. Johan Abrams for Telesur in Cape Town.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.